I never thought a broken radiator could feel like destiny. But there I was, crouched under the hood of my own rusting sedan in the corner of a half-empty repair shop, listening to the drip-drip of water from somewhere deep in the engine when she walked in. Her heels clicked against the cracked concrete floor, soft but insistent, like she was threading through the quiet deliberately. I looked up, expecting someone's cousin. My cousin had mentioned a friend needing help, but instead, she stopped mid-step and glanced straight at me, her dark eyes sharp, measuring. "Is this salvageable?" she asked, nodding toward the car. Her voice carried confidence, but not arrogance, more like someone who knew enough to be patient, even when she didn't fully understand what she was looking at. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and for a moment, I forgot the radiator, the tools, even the dust motes floating in the sunlight. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware that my shirt was smeared with grease. Probably. Could take a few hours, though. I tried to sound casual, but my hands wouldn't stop fiddling with a loose wrench. She smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curl of the lips that made me feel like I'd glimpsed something private. "I have time," she said. "Besides, I hear you're good at rescuing hopeless cases." I felt heat creep up my neck. Not embarrassment exactly. Something sharper, a mix of curiosity and a jolt I couldn't name. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't flirting in a way I'd recognize. It was something else. Something that made my chest tighten without warning. Her cousin, who had been hovering awkwardly behind her, pretending to browse the small shelf of magazines, leaned closer to me at one point. "This feels like fate," she whispered, eyes flicking toward the woman with an intensity one didn't understand. Then she laughed nervously and drifted away. And I kept watching her. Watching the way she tilted her head slightly when she asked questions, how she absent-mindedly brushed a strand of hair behind her ear when I pointed to a stubborn bolt. Everything was ordinary. Everything was mundane. And yet, in some quiet corner of my mind, I couldn't stop thinking that nothing about this was ordinary at all. She crouched beside me at one point to look at the radiator more closely. Our knees brushed, a fleeting, accidental touch, but it lingered in the air longer than it should have. She didn't pull away too quickly, didn't move too slowly. She just stayed there, letting the moment exist, and it was enough to make me stumble over my next words. Maybe this tube." I started, and she nodded, her eyes not leaving mine, patient but alert. There was a rhythm to it, like our movements had begun an unspoken conversation. One where words were optional, where silence carried weight. I didn't know her, and yet, in that silence, it felt like I was learning the edges of her, how she navigated space, how she made herself small and commanding at once. By the time she left, my hands smelled of oil, my shirt was streaked, and I had to force myself to stop staring after her. Outside, the sun was setting, and the repair shop smelled of metal and motor oil. But all I could think about was the way she had bent over the engine, the tilt of her chin, the subtle warmth of her hand near mine. I shook my head, trying to clear the lingering echo of her presence. I shouldn't be thinking like this. She was someone else's world, someone entirely untouchable. And yet, as I stood there, alone with the hum of the shop and the fading sunlight, I realized I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me, like she knew something I didn't. The next time I saw her, it wasn't in the chaos of a half-broken radiator, but in the quiet corner of a small, sunlit bookstore. I had been shelving returned books after my shift, and she appeared in the doorway like she'd stepped out of another world entirely, confident, but carrying a kind of tiredness I hadn't noticed before. She didn't look around. She went straight to the shelves where the poetry books were stacked and ran her fingers along the spines with a slow, careful deliberation. I lingered nearby, pretending to organize a pile of returned novels, but I couldn't stop myself from noticing the way her hands moved. Delicate, precise, almost like they were aware of how much attention they could command without effort. When she finally glanced at me, it was brief, almost dismissive, but I caught a flicker of something I couldn't name. Guarded, maybe, or wary. I hesitated, unsure if I should speak or retreat. Something inside me urged caution, though curiosity wouldn't let me step away. "Hey," I said finally, soft enough not to startle her. She looked up properly this time, and the faintest shadow of a smile touched her lips. "Oh, hi. Didn't expect to see anyone here," she said. Her voice carried that same confident timbre, but now there was a slight tremor at the edges, like she was holding back something. I nodded, unsure what to say next. "You like poetry?" I asked, gesturing toward the shelf she was still perusing. "Yes," she said, quietly, almost reluctantly. Then, after a pause, she added, "Some of it feels dangerous. Or maybe just honest." She let her fingers linger on a well-worn copy of Rilke before setting it back. There was a moment of hesitation there, something unspoken, and I realized she was letting me see a fragment of herself, however briefly. I wanted to reach out, to say something clever, something that could bridge that gap, but my words tangled. So instead, I just watched her. Watched the faint shadows under her eyes, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the slight tension in her shoulders. I wanted to ask if she was always this guarded, but the thought of breaking the fragile pause between us stopped me. She laughed suddenly at something. Maybe something in the book, maybe nothing at all, and it was soft but bright, the kind of laugh that made a room feel smaller and closer all at once. I noticed how her fingers brushed over the pages, how she leaned just slightly forward, unguarded for a fleeting second. That second lingered, like a spark waiting for the right wind. When she finally moved to leave, she paused near the doorway. Her gaze flicked back toward me, lingering just a moment too long. There was something in it, an invitation or a warning. I couldn't tell. My chest tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath. She smiled again, quiet, almost apologetic, and whispered, "Thank you for noticing." Then she was gone, leaving the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the sunlight. I stayed where I was, feeling the empty space she had left behind, wondering if I would ever see that spark again, or if it had already burned into something I wasn't ready to name. It was late when she asked me to help her move some old boxes in the storage room of the cafe, where she sometimes volunteered for evening events. The rain had started, light at first, then heavier, tapping insistently against the windows. I hadn't expected to see her here tonight, and the sight of her standing amid stacks of boxes, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the curve of her forearm, made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't accounted for. "You're always everywhere," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, though my hands were already itching to lift the nearest box just to be near her. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Not everywhere. Just sometimes where it matters." Her eyes flicked briefly to mine, and for a moment, the room shrank to the space between us. The smell of damp cardboard, the faint perfume she wore, the low hum of the refrigerator in the corner. We worked in silence, lifting, shifting, stacking. At one point, a box slipped, and without thinking, I reached for it at the same time she did. Our hands brushed, just fingertips, but I felt it like an electric charge. She froze, her breath catching ever so slightly. I wanted to say something, apologize, joke, anything, but I couldn't. Words would ruin it. "I didn't mean to," she started, then stopped. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she straightened, moving a step back, creating distance between us that hadn't existed a second ago. I watched her adjust her sleeves, tug at her hair, any small movement that would distract from the awkward gravity in the room. I wanted to ask her why she'd stopped herself, why her hand had lingered near mine, why her gaze had found mine longer than necessary. Instead, I just stacked another box, pretending the moment hadn't happened, pretending I could act normal while my pulse hammered in my ears. Then her phone buzzed, a message that lit up the dim corner of the room. She glanced at it, and I caught a shadow cross her face, a flicker of annoyance, then resignation. She typed quickly, paused, then looked back at me, hiding something behind a careful mask of neutrality. Whatever it was, I didn't push. That wasn't my place. We continued working until the last box was set down. The room was silent except for the rain, louder now, drumming against the metal roof. She leaned slightly against the stack of boxes, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I noticed how tired she looked, how fragile and strong she could be at the same time. I wanted to tell her something, anything, about the way I felt. I wanted to reach out, just once, to close that fraction of distance between us. But the moment didn't hold. I hesitated, she shifted, and the space was gone before it could mean anything. "Thanks for the help," she said finally, voice soft, almost a whisper. She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Our eyes met, long, quiet, charged with words we didn't speak. I wanted to step forward. I wanted to say something reckless, something that might change everything. But I didn't. I let her leave, the door clicking shut behind her, the rain filling the silence she left behind. And I stood there, frozen, realizing that I'd almost crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and that part of me wanted desperately to do it anyway. I didn't expect her to show up at my apartment that evening. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shiny and deserted, and I was just rinsing the grease off my hands when the knock came. I opened the door to find her standing there, coat dripping, hair clinging to her forehead. Her eyes were wide, searching, vulnerable in a way she rarely let anyone see. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. No pretense, no small talk, just a question that felt heavy with more than I could name. I stepped aside, and she entered, shaking off her coat, the faint smell of rain mixing with her perfume. We didn't sit immediately. We just stood, facing each other across the narrow living room, the silence thick and insistently loud. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mouth went dry. Finally, she broke it. "What are we doing?" I blinked, unsure if she meant it rhetorically or if she actually wanted an answer. My chest tightened, and I realized I had no words that could capture the chaos of wanting someone who felt like both danger and gravity. I don't know," I admitted finally, voice low, hesitant. I can't stop thinking about you." Her gaze softened, but there was still that cautious edge, the invisible boundary she'd built around herself. She looked at her hands, twisting a ring on her finger that wasn't mine. "I don't want to ruin whatever this is," she murmured. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and I caught the flicker of fear beneath the surface. We moved slowly, unconsciously, toward each other, but still there was space, enough to remind us that we weren't allowed the truth of closeness. I noticed the fine lines around her eyes, the faint weariness in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she rested them on the arm of the couch. I wanted to reach out, wanted to close that space, but I stayed still. My own hands shook, gripping the edge of the counter as if it could anchor me. "Maybe we're more complicated than I realized," I said. My voice cracked, but she didn't flinch. She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking I should walk away," she said, almost to herself. "But then I see you, and I can't. And that terrifies me." Her words hung in the air, fragile but jagged. I wanted to argue, to say it's okay, to tell her that I felt the same, but I didn't. I just let her words settle, heavy and true, between us. We stood there like that for minutes I couldn't measure. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way her hair framed her face, the faint tremor in her jaw as she tried to hold herself together. I wanted to say something, anything, but the right words didn't exist. Finally, she took a step back, eyes glistening, and whispered, "I'm afraid of losing myself in this, in us. And yet, I already feel like I have." I froze, the weight of her admission pressing into me, and I realized the truth. Nothing between us could ever be ordinary again. I didn't expect the shift to come from a simple object. She pulled a folded envelope from the pocket of her coat, worn at the edges, and placed it on the kitchen counter between us. The handwriting was elegant, familiar in a way I didn't recognize at first. "I found this while clearing some old drawers," she said softly. Her eyes didn't meet mine, tracing some invisible point on the floor. "It's from him." She paused. "From years ago, before everything changed." I felt a subtle jolt. Not shock exactly, but something like a tremor through the quiet we'd been living in. I wanted to reach for the envelope, to touch it, but I stayed where I was, unsure if I had the right to witness this. She ran her fingers along the crease, delicate and hesitant. "I never sent it," she admitted, voice low. "I wrote it when I thought he might understand me. But he never did, never really cared." Her thumb hovered over the flap as if she could will the words back into the paper. I wanted to say something, to bridge the distance, to tell her it was okay, but the truth of her vulnerability stopped me. Instead, I said the first thing that came to mind. Reminds me of someone you lost, doesn't he? She looked up sharply, startled by how quickly I'd seen it. Her eyes glistened for a moment, not angry, not embarrassed, just raw. Yes, she whispered. And that, it wasn't just him. It was everything I thought I could hold on to. And it slipped through my fingers. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of weight, of understanding, of the quiet admission that life could break you in ways no one could repair. I noticed the subtle tremble in her hands, the way her lips pressed together as if to hold back a flood. I realized that this quiet grief, this memory, was as much a part of her as her laughter, her confidence, her careful control. I didn't know how to respond, so I just leaned slightly closer, letting the space between us shrink by a fraction. No words, just presence, just acknowledgement. She let out a small, shaky breath and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I thought I'd moved on, but holding this again, her voice broke off, unfinished, but the meaning was clear. She had moved forward, yes, but parts of her heart still lingered in shadows she rarely allowed anyone to see. I swallowed, my own throat tight. I wanted to say something comforting or clever or brave, but the honesty of the moment made all words unnecessary. I just let my gaze stay on her, on the fragile strength in her posture, the quiet surrender in her eyes. Then she did something unexpected. She set the envelope down and looked at me, really looked, for a long moment. I don't know what I'm doing, she said quietly. But I do know. I'm tired of pretending I'm not, feeling things I shouldn't. Her admission lingered in the room like the faint echo of a song. I realized in that instant that everything had shifted, not with a bang, not with fireworks, but with the quiet tremor of truth. And somehow, just somehow, it left a space between us that was terrifying and magnetic at once. It was late afternoon when she returned to the cafe, the sunlight slanting low through the windows, painting the room gold. I was stacking chairs, wiping down the counter, pretending not to anticipate her arrival. But the second I saw her, I knew I hadn't been pretending well. She slid into the booth across from me without a word, her bag resting on the seat beside her. We didn't speak immediately. The quiet stretched between us like a living thing, soft and insistent. I watched her, noting the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her hands fidgeted with the strap of her bag, the subtle tension in her shoulders. I thought maybe we should just sit, she said finally. Her voice was low, careful, but there was no hesitation. Not exactly. More like permission, for both of us, to acknowledge something we'd been holding in silence. I nodded, sliding into the seat opposite her. The distance felt unnecessary, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, we leaned closer. Neither of us spoke, but the air hummed with the weight of shared understanding. Everything we hadn't said, everything we had feared, was there, resting gently on the space between us. I noticed her hand tremble slightly as she reached for her coffee. Without thinking, I lifted mine, brushing my fingers against hers, accidental and deliberate all at once. She didn't pull away. She didn't move closer, either, but she let the touch linger, and that small, quiet gesture carried more than words ever could. We sat like that for a while, the hum of the cafe around us fading into a blur. There was no dramatic confession, no grand declaration, just a mutual acknowledgement that the line we had been tiptoeing along had shifted irrevocably. Her eyes found mine, steady and unguarded. I saw a flicker of relief, and something else, a quiet acceptance that what was between us didn't need to be named aloud to be real. She leaned back slightly, and I mirrored her, matching the rhythm of her breathing. We didn't need to talk. There was a comfort in the shared space, the unspoken promise that neither of us would step back now. I watched her glance at the window, then at her hands, and finally at me. The faintest smile touched her lips, soft, almost imperceptible, but enough to make the room feel warmer, fuller. Then, slowly, deliberately, she rested her hand over mine. Not a grasp, not a demand, just a touch that said, "I'm here. And so are you." I let my fingers brush hers in return, careful, respectful, and infinitely relieved. We sat in silence after that, the world outside continuing without notice of the quiet shift that had occurred in that small booth. There was no rush, no pressure, no need for words. Just presence, just acknowledgement, just the gentle, unspoken certainty that this, whatever it was ours to explore, carefully, slowly, inevitably. I realized then that the chaos, the tension, the near misses, the storms and letters and small confessions, all of it had led here. And sitting there, fingers brushing, hearts quietly aligned, I knew with a certainty I couldn't name aloud that nothing could undo the gravity between us. We didn't speak again. We didn't need to. I think about that afternoon often, how sunlight pooled across the cafe tables, how her hand fit against mine with a quiet inevitability that made all the waiting, all the hesitations, suddenly worth it. From where I sit now, months later, it feels almost surreal. Not the kind of storybook surreal, but the kind that lingers in quiet corners of memory, in the soft cadence of ordinary days made extraordinary by shared presence. She's changed, I realize. Not in any dramatic way, not in some sweeping gesture of transformation, but in the subtle way she lets herself pause now. She laughs a little longer, takes her time over decisions she once rushed through, and doesn't apologize for moments of stillness. I see it in the way she tilts her head when she's thinking, the way she brushes her fingers across the edge of a table, letting herself simply exist without the weight of always having to perform strength. I've changed, too. I'm more aware of the spaces between people, of the things that don't need to be said to matter. I've learned to notice the curve of a shoulder, the faint tremor in someone's voice, the small gestures that carry more truth than words ever could. I've learned that patience can feel like devotion, that restraint can be a kind of intimacy, and that sometimes love doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It simply settles in, quietly undeniable. We still have our ordinary moments. Coffee in the mornings, rain tapping against the windows, shared glances across crowded rooms. But those ordinary moments are extraordinary now, because they exist in the aftermath of everything we navigated. Letters, near misses, silences, the unspoken gravity that pulled us closer before either of us admitted it. We learned to move through it together, slowly, carefully, without urgency, without pretending we weren't aware of the stakes. Sometimes, I catch her watching me when she thinks I'm not looking, and I see that same quiet reflection mirrored in her eyes. It's not always easy. There are still moments of doubt, of fear that the fragile balance could shift. But there's also a certainty, an understanding that whatever this is, whatever we've built between us, it's ours to hold, gently, deliberately, honestly. And so we sit, side by side, in silence that speaks louder than any words could. Fingers brushing, elbows touching, breaths falling into rhythm with each other. I realize that love doesn't always demand declarations. Sometimes it simply waits for two people to notice it, to acknowledge it, and to allow themselves to exist within it without question or apology. I lean slightly, resting my forehead against hers, and feel the quiet weight of everything we've survived and discovered. That moment, still, simple, absolute, feels like the end of a long, slow inhale and the beginning of something steady and enduring. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?